Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, April 13th, 2010. I'm your host, Mark Passio, and you are listening to What on Earth is Happening. My website is whatonearthishappening.com. In previous weeks on this show, what we've been doing basically is largely philosophical. It's largely conceptual. We've been talking about the aspects of human consciousness, how there are three basic aspects to our consciousness: thought, emotion, and action. We started looking at the human brain and its basic structures, also a threefold or a three-tiered system, the triune brain, comprised of the R complex, the limbic system, and the human neocortex. We looked at what brain imbalances cause, what they do to the brain when either the left brain is completely dominant or the right brain is completely dominant in an individual. So what we're trying to really get down to on this show, and this will continue as the weeks go on, are causal factors. That's what this show is really all about, and that's what's going to really set it apart from a lot of other programs that really do a lot to discuss and to reveal the symptoms of what's taking place in our reality, but don't very much really look at the underlying causal factors, the deep relationships and the things that really go into creating the external reality that we see and that we experience. That's what the show really is all about, getting down to causal factors, causality. And basically, we looked at the two basic ways that human beings are fooled, the two basic ways, the reasons for human suffering. It's incredibly simple. People accept that which isn't true, and they refuse to accept that which is true. That's it. It really is that simple, folks. People accept lies and refuse to accept truth. And there is such a thing as truth. And that can really be boiled down. The causal factors that are really creating the human condition can really be boiled down to one phrase: the ability to tell truth from falsehood. The ability to tell truth from falsehood. That's what is creating our experience in the world. That's it. That's simple. But we'll expand on that. We'll unpack it further. We'll look at different aspects of it. We've been also discussing a philosophy over the last couple of weeks called solipsism, the idea that there is no such thing as truth, that perception is reality, that really the only thing that is real is the contents of one's own mind. And I call this the biggest lie. This is the underlying fundamental lie upon which all other lies are built, because it is making the claim that an individual is the personal arbiter of truth in one's own life. That truth is not something to be discovered and accepted, that you can make it up as you go along. And more people are a victim of this ideology than anyone would even imagine, would even care to imagine. It's a rampant ideology. If you really start to talk to people and try to get down to their basic underlying worldview, which is another thing we're going to talk about today on the show, you understand that many people's worldview is based in solipsism. So for today's show, we'll be discussing that a little bit more when we come to the topic of worldview. What I'm going to do on the show today, and hopefully I'll break this between the 2 hours somewhat evenly, is I'm going to discuss the concept of polarity. Polarity. Okay? Now, before I even get into this, I want to address one other thing about how I'm going to do things on the show. For the next several weeks, we'll probably continue to break down conceptual ideas and philosophies and really underlying things that people have to have a background in understanding if we're going to understand the bigger picture. So probably for at least the next month, I'll continue to break down and expand upon topics and concepts, and these are largely, again, related with causal factors of what's going on, and they're largely contained in my presentation, but some things, I'll expand even further on since we have more time to do that. I want to address, for some people that are familiar with this material already, bear with me because there's a lot of people who don't have a background in this material and may be coming to it for the first time. So, when they come to the site, when they turn the show on, when they download a podcast, this may be new for a lot of people, and I hope it will be new for a lot of people. Otherwise, we're not reaching anyone new. So there's a delicate balance to walk here with moving too fast and losing people who may be completely new to this information versus moving too slowly and perhaps boring people that want to get into further details and topics. So again, I'm going to try to strike that balance, and bear with me. You're welcome to comment on how well I'm doing at that and, give some suggestions. But after we go through a few more weeks of basic conceptual material, then I think I'll start having some guests on the show and interviewing people and getting their take on things. So that's how it's going to work. And for today, the two basic topics that I'd like to cover, the first one is polarity, and we're going to look at the two basic emotional polarities. There are really only two basic forces at work within us, and they take different forms, and they have different manifestations. So we'll look at these two seemingly opposite polarized forces. So that's what's called polarity, okay? Opposites. Or as we'll see as we go further into the topic, seeming opposites. The next topic, the next part of tonight's breakdown of concepts is going to be worldview. We got a little bit into this during the last program, but basically worldview is exactly what it sounds like. It's how do we view the world that we live in? How do we view our relationship to the world, our relationship in the wider picture of things, and our relationship to other people? So worldview is really the driving factor behind what we are creating in our lives. Essentially, what we think about most of the time is what we're becoming. What we think about most of the time is what we're becoming. The worldview that we hold shapes the events that manifest. I'll say that again. The worldview that we hold shapes the events that manifest in our lives. So the way we think is critically important to what is actually taking place on the screen in front of us, so to speak, what we see out there in the world. So these are the two concepts that I'll be working with and breaking down in detail tonight: polarity and worldview. So let's start with polarity. And, again, not everyone is familiar with some of these concepts and words, so I'll spell polarity for everyone. This is P-O-L-A-R-I-T-Y, polarity. There are two basic underlying emotional forces. These are forces that are indwelling within us. You can look at them look at them as emanations, or you could look at them as essences. These are things that really can't be boiled down much further. They're primary things. Okay? They're primary causers. These are prime movers, you can look at them as. So there are two essential emotions, and they're polar opposites of each other, at least seemingly. So let me explain what I mean by seeming polar opposites. In any quality that you can really think of, there are scales, or there are degrees within. Okay, so look at the dynamics of hot and cold. Hot and cold. Are these really opposites? Really? Well, most people would say, sure, they're completely opposite. If something's hot, it's not cold. If something's cold, it's not hot. But if you look a little bit deeper than the seeming opposite nature of these two qualities, hot and cold, you'll see that really all you're talking about when you talk about hot and cold is energy. That's all. You're talking about how much energy is indwelling within the thing that you're measuring. So temperature is a measuring scale for energy. Okay? If there's a lot of heat energy, we call it hot. If there isn't a lot of heat energy, or there's largely an absence of heat energy, we call it cold. So when you look at it from that perspective, are they really polar opposites? No. They're really measures of the same dynamic, heat energy. And that's all there really is, heat energy. Okay? There isn't hot and cold. Those are two polar perceptions. It's a way of looking at heat energy. You're comparing it to something else, to another extreme of the scale. Because if there was only one temperature, there would be no such thing as the concept of temperature. I'll say that again. If there were only one temperature, there would be no such thing as the concept of temperature. You would have nothing to compare it against at all. Everything is one temperature. It always was, it is now, it always will be. Then the concept of temperature would never even occur to any being. You couldn't even think of what temperature is. There's no comparison, there's no scale of comparison. So you could do this with another dynamic like light and dark. Well, that seems like two polar opposites again. But if you really look at that, those are just measures of the same dynamic. Once again, light or its absence. Because dark isn't actually a thing. It's simply the absence of light. Light energy. You go into a room, with a dark room with a candle, you're bearing light energy into the room. And you could say, okay, that candle lit up the room and there's light here now. You can't do the same thing with darkness. You can't shine darkness into a room. The concept doesn't make any sense because there's really no such thing as darkness. There's only light energy or its absence. So we will see that this concept applies in the emotional polarities that I'm going to discuss on this show. That there really is only one thing contained within these seeming polar opposites. The other thing is the illusory component. It's something that really isn't there, but we see it as being there, so we have a scale of comparison to compare the real thing against, to come to know the real essence. Okay? So look at it in the context of light and darkness. There really is only light, energy, or light energy not manifesting itself, and we call that darkness. Okay? So the two basic emotional polarities. The first one is the essence of everything that we perceive as good or feeling good. Anything that we perceive in that context, what creates anything that we perceive as feeling good within us, or what we perceive as good for us in the external reality that we exist in. And it's very simple. Most people immediately understand what this is. Most people get this on the first shot if you ask them, what is the underlying essence of everything that we perceive of as good, as uplifting, as beneficial, as truly powerful? And of course, the word that I'm talking about is love. Love is the first basic emotional polarity, the first basic seeming polarity, as I will further explain. This isn't, what I'm talking about here when I talk about love is not a romance novel or a Hollywood movie definition of love. So this isn't possessing someone. This isn't, being jealous about somebody. This isn't trying to keep someone. It isn't attachment to someone else. These are dramatized and romanticized notions of love that we see in popular fiction and on mainstream media and in Hollywood. That's not the concept that I'm talking about here. Love is the force which expands consciousness. I'll say that again because of how important that statement is. Love is the force that expands human consciousness, that expands consciousness, period. Okay? It is the force which opens up and flowers consciousness. So anything that is moving us toward a greater understanding of ourselves and the world in which we live, and that is expanding consciousness outward to ever greater and greater awareness, that is love. That's what love is. Now, some people will say, well, you can't really define love or put a definition on it because it limits it. But if you really think about the words that I'm saying here in a wider context, this explains what this powerful force really is. It is that which opens up and expands human consciousness. Now, of course, there is this seeming opposite, or this polarity that goes against the force of love and seeks to do the exact opposite. So love expands consciousness and moves it to ever greater states of awareness. The opposite emotional polarity from love that closes awareness down. It shuts down. It is the compressive force. Closes consciousness down. Makes you not want to look. Makes you not want to seek, makes someone not want to understand or care or act. And most people usually will get this if given the opportunity to take a guess at what it is. Some people will guess hate because they, in word association, generally think of that as the first thing that is the opposite of love. But hate is a manifestation of this force. And of course, the force that I'm referring to is fear. Fear is the opposite emotional polarity from love. It's the force which closes down human consciousness. It strangles the flowering of consciousness. It makes people cut off from their higher nature. And these two basic emotional polarities, love, which is the expansive force, and fear, which is the contractive force, have both of them, each of them have internal qualities. They have qualities which express within us, within our consciousness. They also have qualities which create something in the external reality that we live in. So they have what I call an internal and an external manifestation. So love has an internal manifestation and love has an external manifestation. Fear has an internal manifestation and an external manifestation. So let's get into these four other qualities, the internal and external qualities of love and fear. So, if we look at the internal expression of love, how does the love force manifest internally within us, within our consciousness? What we're basically saying is, if the expansive force of consciousness, which we call love, manifests in an individual, the expansive force of consciousness manifests within the individual, what could we describe that state or that manifestation as? Well, you could give it a few names. You could call it self-love. And that's one way of looking at it. Some people would describe this state as enlightenment, and that's another way of looking at it. Some people would describe this state as balance or harmony within. So internal peace is another way you could look at it. That's a very good way of looking at this quality, this internal manifestation of the force of love within an individual. Now, I have a specific name for it that I talk about in my presentation, and the name may be misleading to some people when they first hear it spoken. But let me explain what I view this internal quality as. We talked about in earlier shows the three aspects of human consciousness: thought, emotion, and action. When we bring these three aspects into harmony within us, such that there is no internal contradiction within our consciousness. So, what that means is we are a person that behaves in a way such that as we think, so we feel, and so we act in the world. So the way that we think, what's going on inside our mind, reflects in perfect balance and unison what's going on inside our heart center, okay, our care, our emotions. And these two qualities, what we think and what we feel within, are not in internal opposition with how we act or behave in the world, which means that we do. Our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions are unified as one, and there is no internal contradiction or opposition between those three things. Now, let's think about this in a symbolic context for a minute before I go further. The thoughts are the creator aspect. What we create has to exist as a thought, the emanation. Okay, this is the essence quality. Then we have an internal manifestation called our emotions. This is the spirit side. So we have the mind aspect, the thought. That's the essence. Then we have the internal quality, which is the emotions. And that's the spiritual aspect. The spirit in which we do things is called our emotions. And then there is a byproduct, okay, a male byproduct, because actions are a male essence. We do them outwardly. Actions are thrust outward into the world. So the male child of our thoughts and our emotions is our actions. So we have a trinity here. We have a creator aspect, we have a spirit aspect, and we have a child aspect, a male child, a son. Okay, so there's the essence, thoughts, that's mind. That goes on in the mind. That's the creator. The internal quality, the emotions. That's the Holy Spirit, or the sacred feminine, the goddess. And then there's the child, the divine child, a male child, the son, so to speak, symbolically. That's our actions in the world, the byproduct of the marriage of our thoughts and our emotions. Now, if they are all one, all three of these things are one, we don't have any internal opposition. Now, the word opposition is critical to understand. If you go back and look at the ancient Hebrew language, there's a word that means opposer, opposition, adversary. And that word is shatan, where we get the word Satan from. Okay? It means that which divides, that which opposes, that which creates opposition. Because this force, the adversary, the opposer, the one who divides us, gets into us the minute that we are internally divided, because our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions are not operating in unison as one. We're not a being that as we think, so we feel, so we act. We'll often do something in opposition to how we say we feel. This is the betrayal of the spirit, because you're going against what you know to be right and what you feel to be right. Sin against the spirit. Taking an action for a justification. I know that I should be doing this, but I'm going to do this, which is not in the spirit of what I know and feel. And that is the force called Shaitan, or Satan, the opposer, the adversary. It's not an actual being that people imagine in different religious connotations. It's a way of being in the world. That's the kind of being that it is. And there's mostly just about everyone exists in this state of opposition at some point or another in their lives, and continues to exist in that state of opposition. There's very few people who are a completely united being and do and take the actions that they say, they think, and feel. Because it's hard. It requires courage. It requires an immense amount of courage. And there's so many things that are built up in this world to make us go against our better judgment. And we justify it. We keep justifying those things. Oh, if I didn't do that, then there would be these repercussions. If I did that, there would be these repercussions. There's an endless supply of justifications that we provide for not doing the correct moral thing in life. And this, to take this back to the concept of the emotional polarities, specifically the internal, indwelling aspect of the dynamic of love, the force of love. The state that I refer to as the expression of love, when it comes to fruition, when it comes to flowering inside an individual, I call it dominion. Dominion. This is a word that means rulership. It means that someone is the king or queen. They have dominion. This is self-dominion. It doesn't imply any external ownership or rulership. This is dominion of the kingdom of self. You could call it mastery, as many people have. That's why we refer to great masters and wisdom teachers and avatars. They had dominion. As they thought, so they felt, so they acted. And those three existed in harmony. They weren't divided within. They didn't have the indwelling force of the adversary, the opposer, opposition, that divides us from inside of ourself. So that's what I mean by dominion. You could call it self-control. You could call it self-ownership. Self-ownership. And a great word that really does represent this concept. I actually thought of even changing the word that I use in the presentation to this word, because it really does sum up this concept perfectly. And I would say you could use it interchangeably with dominion or self-love or harmony within or internal peace or internal balance. Okay? And that's sovereignty. sovereignty. Because what sovereignty really means is the same thing as dominion. If you break the word down, sov, reign, self-reign, self-ownership, self-governance. No external governance, no external control, internal governance, internal control over one's thoughts, emotions, and actions. And knowing how to use all of those things in harmony, such that we're not divided within ourselves. That is the state that I call dominion, and that you could call many things. Probably a very good synonym with dominion would be sovereignty. And that's what this show is ultimately all about. It is about sovereignty. Sovereignty. Self-rulership. No masters. Self-ownership. The only way we can really come to that state, to that condition within ourselves, is if we become beings that as we think, so we feel, and so we act. So we act. And I'm stressing that for an extremely important reason, because that's what this is all about. The courage to act. Now, when this condition is not present, there is a state of mind that takes over an individual. Well, if dominion or sovereignty is self-love, it's self-ownership, it's self-rulership, being the king or queen of one's own personal kingdom of self, what is the opposite, the polar opposite of that state? So this would mean that the being is essentially ruled by the force of fear, the opposite of love. Well, this would mean that the person is always in internal opposition with themselves. They're always in contradiction between what they think, what they feel, and how they act. These three things are never in harmony in a being internally ruled by fear. If their consciousness is governed by the force of fear, the state of consciousness within results in a condition that's very simple, and it's called confusion. Confusion. What confusion is the state of internal disharmony and the state of the consciousness being closed down and cut off from higher self, cut off from higher levels of awareness. Someone in this condition is not capable of knowing truth from falsehood. They don't even know what's going on inside them. How would anybody expect them to understand what's going on in the external reality that they live in? And to be able to tell what's real from what's fantasy and what's illusion? They don't understand what's taking place in their own thoughts or in their own emotions, because they're in such a state of confusion that they're not in touch with their emotional compass, their guidance system for direction in life. They don't value truth and understand how natural law works, how getting in touch with truth improves the quality of our life, and not caring about it makes our life turn to complete disarray and breakdown. Someone in confusion does not really love themselves. They don't have internal love, the true expression of love. They may think they understand what love is in a limited definition, in a limited scope, but they do not really have internally dwelling self-love. They couldn't possibly understand freedom. They couldn't possibly understand sovereignty. Those words are meaningless to a person in a state of internal opposition. A person in this state of consciousness can pretty much be made or led to do anything. They don't really have a strong internal makeup. Their psychological condition is frail and weak. They are led. They are the led. And sooner or later, the led will become the dead. Harsh, yes, but true, definitely. Okay? So these are really critical concepts to understand and keep in mind. Person in this state, governed by fear, will always be in a state of confusion, which is internal opposition. This is the internally manifesting quality of fear. So, we have love and fear. We have dominion or sovereignty and confusion or indwelling opposition within the being. What do these things create externally? What do they create in the outside world that we see on the screen of reality, so to speak? Well, when love is present and has grown to a great extent in many individuals, in the wider reality, in the shared reality that we all live in, there's a state that comes online. There's a condition that bursts onto the world. Because if love, the true essence of love, the expansion of human consciousness, is carried within many individuals in any society, and those many individuals truly understand what's taking place inside themselves, and they live in a way that is reflected by the notion that as they think, so they feel, and so they act. The condition that will eventually erupt onto the world is called freedom. Freedom is the external manifestation of the love force. Freedom is the external manifestation of the force of love. And that can only occur when enough of the individual consciousnesses, human beings on this planet, come within themselves to a state of dominion, of sovereignty, of self-rulership, because they've made the active free will decision to take actions that are in keeping with their thoughts and their emotions. And they cannot be driven apart from that. They cannot be made to go against what they know to be right and what they feel in their heart to be right. Their actions will be one with those qualities. And freedom won't occur in this world 1 second before that state occurs within many, 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 many more individuals walking on this world. Don't expect it until people change their mind, their hearts, and their actions in drastic ways compared to what they're thinking, feeling, and doing now. Now, the opposite of freedom, the external manifestation of the force of fear. The external manifestation of the force of fear. Fear is the force which shuts down consciousness. It's the force which divides us. It's the force which puts us into a state of internal opposition or confusion. And when that goes into the external reality widely, such that many, many, many people are not self-governing, don't understand sovereignty, aren't concerned with the truth, aren't concerned with freedom, and are totally in a state of opposition within, you get a condition that manifests in the shared reality that we live in. And that condition is control. Control. And this time I do mean external control. People trying to control the actions of other people, even if they're not doing anything to harm anyone. You get people wanting to control more and more and more and more. And it's never enough. Ultimately, this condition leads to slavery. And largely, that's where we're at, folks, for those who don't know that yet. Many people listening to this show just happen to be coming through my website for the first time. Understand that's where we're at. And if we're going to get out of that, we have to become united, not divided anymore within. Becoming beings that as we think, so we feel, and so we act. And that's a tall task that requires a lot of courage. Polarity, and the seemingly opposite polarities of love and fear, the basic emotional polarities. And I say seemingly opposite because ultimately one of these is an illusion. And I don't think it's difficult for anybody with any understanding to figure out which one is the true illusion, even though we seem so trapped in it. Fear is an illusion, folks. It doesn't exist. Only love exists, and fear is simply the absence of its expression, of the expression of love. That's it. It really doesn't exist on its own. It is an illusory force, an illusory quality when we begin to forget who we really are.